In the summer of 1779, the United States launched the largest naval expedition of its war for independence. More than 40 ships, over 1,000 men. Their target, a single, half-finished British fort on a wilderness peninsula in what is now Maine, held by a garrison less than half their size. 6 weeks later, every one of those ships had been burned, sunk, or captured. It was the worst naval disaster in American history, and it would not be equaled until the morning of Pearl Harbor, 162 years later. The Penobscot Expedition. It begins with the British. In June of 1779, a Scottish brigadier named Francis McLean sailed from Halifax into Penobscot Bay. His orders: to carve a loyalist province out of the Maine frontier, a colony to be called New Ireland, and to build a naval base to choke American shipping. McLean had about 700 men and 3 small sloops of war under Captain Henry Mowat. On the high ground above the harbor, on a peninsula called Majabigwadus, today the town of Castine, they began an earthwork named Fort George. When the Americans arrived, its walls were only a few feet high. That was the prize. A prompt assault would almost certainly have taken it. Everything that follows is the story of why that assault never came. Massachusetts answered with overwhelming force, on paper. In 10 frantic days, the state assembled the largest American fleet of the war. Some 44 vessels carrying more than 1,000 Marines and militia. At its heart sailed the Continental frigate Warren, 32 guns, the flagship. But the expedition sailed with no single commander. The fleet answered to Commodore Dudley Saltonstall of the Continental Navy. The Army answered to General Solomon Lovell of the Massachusetts Militia, with Peleg Wadsworth as his second, and a Boston silversmith named Paul Revere commanding the artillery. Saltonstall could not command Lovell. Lovell could not command Saltonstall. 2 services, 2 governments, and no one with the power to give a final order. At first, it looked easy. The fleet stood into the bay on the 25th of July. Within 2 days, Continental Marines had stormed a British battery and carried off its guns. Saltonstall's own captains could see the chance slipping away, and they handed their Commodore a petition, begging him not to wait.
We think delays in the present case are extremely dangerous, as our enemies are daily fortifying and strengthening themselves. We wish to go immediately into the harbor and attack the enemy's ships.
Then came the expedition's finest hour. Before dawn on the 28th of July, 400 men were rowed to the foot of a near-vertical bluff and dragged themselves up the cliff under fire, by the bushes and the roots of the trees. Among the British driven back that morning was a young lieutenant named John Moore, who would one day die a hero at Corunna. Paul Revere saw it and never forgot it.
The enemy had the most advantageous place I ever saw. It is a bank above 300 feet high and so steep that no person can get up it but by pushing himself up by the bushes and trees. In less than 20 minutes, the enemy gave way and we pursued them. We lost about 35 killed and wounded.
In under 20 minutes, the Americans took the heights and pushed to within 600 feet of Fort George, close enough to watch the British scrambling behind walls still only waist-high. Lovell wrote to Boston in triumph. And then, with the fort almost in his grasp, he stopped. He ordered his men to dig in. The fort was never stormed. What followed is one of the strangest perilous's in American military history. Because no one commanded the expedition, the Army and the Navy could act only by agreement, and they would not agree. Lovell would not storm the fort until Saltonstall destroyed Mowat's sloops. Saltonstall would not risk his ships until Lovell took the fort. For more than 2 weeks, 3 small British sloops held off the largest fleet in American arms, not by fighting, but by waiting. The Council of War, the very thing meant to break such deadlocks, only deepened them. More than 10 were held. Revere likened them to a meeting in a coffee house. Lovell recorded the circular logic in his own journal.
I wrote a letter to the Commodore, desiring an answer whether he would or whether he would not go in with his ships and destroy the shipping of the enemy. If I would storm the fort, he would go in with his ships. The result was that in our present situation, it was impracticable.
But the British were not waiting. On the 3rd of August, Sir George Collier sailed from New York with a relief squadron built around the 64-gun Raisonnable. The window was closing, and Lovell's messages grew desperate.
It appears to me so very practicable that any farther delay must be infamous. And I have at this moment, by a deserter from one of their ships, that the moment you enter the harbor, they will destroy them.
Even the Navy Board, back in Boston, lost patience, and on the 12th of August sent an order directly over Saltonstall's head.
It is therefore our orders that as soon as you receive this, you take the most effectual measures for the capture or destruction of the enemy's ships.
It arrived one day too late. On the 13th of August, the picket ships sighted strange sails standing into the bay. Collier had come. Saltonstall, who had finally meant to attack that very day, called it off. The fleet formed a brief line of battle, and then it broke. There was no fighting retreat. More than 40 ships fled up the Penobscot River, and the British frigates simply herded them like dogs driving sheep. One frigate's log recorded the route with chilling economy.
We pursued the 21 sail of rebels and drove them before us without the return of a single shot. At 6, upwards of 20 sail of small vessels run on shore. The most of them they set fire to.
Over 3 days, the entire American fleet was destroyed, burned by its own crews, run aground and torched, scattered for 40 miles up the river. The flagship Warren blazed 2 miles above the British anchorage. Only 2 vessels were taken whole. One privateer captain, too slow to outrun 3 frigates, left a sailor's blunt account of the end.
My ship sailing heavy, the enemy soon came up with me, 3 frigates, and fired upon me. They hulled me sundry times and wounded some of my men. I found it impossible to join our fleet again and was obliged to strike.
And then the survivors walked home. Some 500 men were killed, wounded, captured, or missing. The rest broke into ragged bands and struggled west through the Maine woods. The command, like the fleet, had simply come apart. Massachusetts wanted someone to blame, and quickly. The Navy Board issued a warrant for the court-martial of Commodore Saltonstall, and its language delivered the verdict before the court had even met.
Whereas the principal part of the fleet has been destroyed and lost, as is suggested, by the bad conduct of the said Dudley Saltonstall, his conduct is now therefore become a proper subject for the examination and judgment of court-martial.
He was found guilty and cashiered, dismissed from the Continental Navy. Beside the court-martial ran a Massachusetts Committee of Inquiry. Its finding pointed in exactly one direction.
The failure was due to want of proper spirit and energy on the part of the Commodore. The destruction occurring principally by the Commodore's not exerting himself at all at the time of the retreat in opposing the enemy's foremost ships in pursuit.
Just as emphatically, it cleared everyone else. Saltonstall was the man, 41 years old, his name unredeemed in his lifetime. The cost was staggering. Well over £1 million in the money of the day, a debt the Commonwealth would argue about with Congress for years. In a single week, the Massachusetts State Navy had ceased to exist. But the most famous casualty of Penobscot was not a ship, it was a reputation. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Revere, silversmith, express rider, commander of the state's artillery, came home under a cloud. That September, a Marine officer named Thomas Carness laid 6 charges against him. They were not gentle.
For disobedience of orders from General Lovell, for unsoldier-like behavior during the whole expedition to Penobscot, which tends to cowardice, for leaving his men and suffering them to disperse.
2 moments on the chaotic retreat were the substance of it. Revere had refused at first to give up his ordnance barge to rescue a stranded crew, insisting that General Wadsworth had no authority over him, and he had marched his men home without orders, arguing that his commission held only for an expedition that had, by then, literally gone up in smoke. He was placed under house arrest and stripped of his command. And from the very first, Revere demanded not mercy, but a trial.
I beg your honors that in a proper time there may be a strict inquiry into my conduct, where I may meet my accusers face to face.
He would wait nearly 3 years, petitioning again and again. A first court-martial was ordered, and then simply never convened. The silence ate at him.
I believe that neither the annals of America nor of Old England can furnish an instance, except in despotic reigns, where an officer was put under arrest and petitioned for a trial, and it was not granted. There will remain an everlasting monument of my disgrace, if I do not prove they are false.
Vindication came at last in February of 1782. A court-martial reduced the case to 2 charges and acquitted him of both, noting that the very boat he was accused of withholding had in fact been used for the rescue. Its closing words gave Revere back his honor, and the governor of Massachusetts signed his name beneath them.
The court are of opinion that Lieutenant Colonel Revere be acquitted with equal honor as the other officers in the same expedition. I approve of the opinion of the court-martial. John Hancock.
For more than 2 centuries, the verdict held. Saltonstall's timidity lost Penobscot. But in 1996, a retired Navy commander and historian named George Bucher reopened the case and argued the Commodore had been a scapegoat. Saltonstall commanded just 3 continental ships out of more than 40, pinned the disaster on the lone continental officer, and a Massachusetts catastrophe became a national one, a bill that could be sent to Congress. And in 1793, Massachusetts sent that bill and collected, "It is a genuine argument, and it is not settled." But whatever the truth of one man's nerve, the deeper fault is plain. Penobscot was not, at bottom, the failure of a coward. It was the failure of a command with no head, 2 equal commanders from 2 governments fighting a war by committee. The councils of war did not resolve the deadlock between the services. They ritualized it. And then the strangest thing of all happened to the Penobscot expedition. It vanished. A young nation building its founding myth had no use for its largest naval disaster. No national hero, no glorious last stand, only ships burned by their own crews and officers blaming one another. The novelist Bernard Cornwell put the reason, most simply,
The Americans wanted to forget it. After all, you won.
but forgetting needs help, and Penobscot got it from poetry. In 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow published a poem that would fix one man forever in the American mind, not as the court-martialed colonel of a lost expedition, but as the lone patriot of a midnight ride.
Listen, my children, and you shall hear of the midnight ride of Paul Revere on the 18th of April in 75.
The poem never mentions 1779. It rearranged the history of 1775 into legend and buried the colonel of Penobscot beneath the hero of the ride. And here lies the sharpest irony of all. The brigadier whose complaints helped put Paul Revere under arrest, Peleg Wadsworth, was Longfellow's own grandfather. The poet who made Revere immortal was the grandson of the man who helped disgrace him. There is one last place to look for the Penobscot expedition, at the bottom of the river that swallowed it. In 1972, a student sonar project, testing new equipment over a spot where a fisherman kept snagging his nets, found cannon lying in the mud. They had found the Defense, a privateer brig burned by her own crew as the British closed in, almost 2 centuries before. What the divers raised was a perfectly preserved slice of a single day in 1779. The brick galley hearth, shoes and buckles, and a tin of dried blueberries, a sailor's ration, still in the ground where the vessel went down. One cannon came up still loaded, its charge intact after 200 years in the dark.
The ball, the wadding, and the powder were all there.
The wider grave is still being mapped. Since 1999, the United States Navy's own underwater archaeologists have worked the Penobscot, searching for the fleet that fled up it.
Since 1999, the Underwater Archaeology Branch has conducted research in the Penobscot River to document shipwrecks and other submerged archaeological sites associated with the Penobscot expedition of 1779.
One survey flagged some 700 targets in the riverbed. Among them, perhaps the flagship Warren herself. 2.5 centuries on, the largest fleet the young republic ever lost still lies there, in the cold and the silt, where it burned. The worst American naval defeat before Pearl Harbor, fought over a fort that was never stormed, lost by a command that could not agree, and forgotten by the country it was meant to serve. The river keeps what the nation chose to forget.